Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Over the past few days, an interesting political story has been circulating in Washington, and it has sparked a surprisingly lively debate about the future of the Republican Party. According to reports from NBC News, Donald Trump recently hosted a dinner at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida with more than 20 major Republican donors. During the evening, while guests were enjoying steak and giant crab, Trump reportedly asked a simple but politically explosive question. If the Republican Party were to choose its candidate for the 2028 presidential election today, who would be the better choice? J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio? According to the people in the room, when the question was asked and reactions started to ripple through the dinner crowd, Rubio appeared to receive the louder applause. The story quickly made its way into political media, and within hours it became a topic of discussion across Washington. The Wall Street Journal reported the same event as well, although its tone was noticeably more balanced and less suggestive about who might actually be leading in that informal room of donors. But before jumping to conclusions about whether Trump is leaning toward Rubio or Vance, it is worth stepping back and thinking about what this moment actually represents. Because if you look closely, the most important part of the story may not be who received the louder applause. The most important part may simply be the fact that the question was asked at all, and more specifically, who asked it. This kind of moment is actually very characteristic of Trump's political style. By publicly floating the idea of a competition between two potential successors and allowing that discussion to leak into the press, Trump accomplishes several things at once. First, he reminds both potential contenders that their political future still runs through him. Second, he reminds the Republican donor class and the broader conservative base that he remains the central figure of gravity within the movement. And third, he creates a media narrative that keeps the spotlight firmly on his influence over the party's future. In that sense, the story is less about the 2028 election itself, and more about the way Trump continues to shape the internal dynamics of the Republican Party. At the same time, the discussion does reveal a deeper strategic question that many Republicans are quietly debating behind the scenes. If Trumpism continues to define the party's identity, who should carry that movement forward once Trump himself is no longer the candidate? In many ways, the contrast between Vance and Rubio represents two different answers to that question. On one side, you have Vance, who is often seen as a more ideological heir to the movement. On the other side, you have Rubio, who is frequently viewed as a candidate who might be better positioned to win a broader national election. Over the past few years, Vance has tried to transform the spirit of the Make America Great Again movement into something closer to a coherent political doctrine. His speeches and policy arguments increasingly focus on themes such as working-class nationalism, skepticism toward global intervention, and confrontation with what many conservatives describe as the deep state. In other words, Vance has been attempting to systemize the political impulses that powered Trump's rise. Instead of simply repeating slogans about American strength and economic nationalism, he has tried to frame those ideas as part of a broader ideological project. For some people within the conservative movement, that effort is appealing because it gives Trumpism a more intellectual and durable foundation. But for others, including some longtime members of Trump's inner circle, there is also a certain discomfort with turning MAGA into a formal theory. Trump himself has always operated more as a political instinct machine than as a traditional ideological architect. His style is improvisational, reactive, and often driven by the emotional currents of the electorate rather than by structured policy frameworks. Rubio, meanwhile, represents a slightly different kind of political profile. He has deep experience in the Senate and in foreign policy debates, and over the years he has gradually aligned himself more closely with Trump's positions on many issues, but he is still widely perceived as someone who can speak to a broader range of voters. When Trump once described one of the potential successors as being more polished, many observers interpreted that comment as a reference to Rubio. In the context of American elections, that characteristic can matter a great deal, presidential races are not decided solely by energizing the party base. They are also determined by the ability to attract independent voters and moderates in key swing states. That reality creates a strategic tension within the Republican Party. Should the next leader of the movement focus primarily on preserving the ideological purity of MAGA, or should the focus shift toward maximizing electoral appeal in a national contest? But there is another reason why this entire debate might be somewhat premature. The 2028 election is still more than 2 years away, and American politics has a remarkable tendency to change very quickly. Economic cycles shift. International crises erupt. Personal scandals emerge. New political figures suddenly capture the public imagination. History provides many examples of presidential candidates who were barely on the national radar 2 years before they ultimately won the White House. For instance, before 2006, very few people seriously believed that Barack Obama would become president just 2 years later. At the time, he was still a relatively new senator with limited national recognition. Yet by 2008, he had built one of the most powerful political movements in modern Democratic Party history. Something similar could be said about Trump himself. As late as 2013, many observers still viewed him primarily as a television personality and businessman rather than a future president. Yet within a few years, he had completely reshaped the Republican Party and won the presidency. Because of that historical pattern, it is entirely possible that the eventual Republican nominee in 2028 may not even be the person most people are talking about today. In other words, the current debate about Vance versus Rubio may be less about a concrete electoral contest and more about a narrative framework through which political commentators are trying to imagine the future. When journalists and analysts discuss potential successors this early in the cycle, they are often engaging in a kind of political storytelling rather than describing an actual race that has already begun. In fact, when you talk to people in Washington policy circles and conservative think tanks, you quickly discover that a number of other names are quietly being mentioned as potential contenders for the next Republican nomination. One of the most frequently discussed figures is Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Even though his previous presidential campaign struggled to gain traction, many analysts believe it would be a mistake to assume that his political future is finished. DeSantis still holds one of the most powerful governorships in the country, leading a state that has become one of the fastest-growing economic centers in the United States. Florida is now the third most populous state in the nation, and its economic performance has often been cited by conservatives as evidence of successful governance. DeSantis also occupies an interesting ideological position within the Republican coalition. He is clearly aligned with many of the cultural and policy priorities associated with the MAGA movement, but he also presents himself as a more disciplined and institutional leader. That combination could allow him to appeal both to Trump loyalists and to more traditional Republicans who prefer a steadier political style. Of course, DeSantis faces significant challenges as well. His earlier presidential campaign left lingering doubts about his national political instincts, and he would likely need to rebuild his image over the next few years if he hopes to re-enter the top tier of presidential contenders. Another figure whose name frequently appears in discussions about the party's future is Glenn Youngkin, the former governor of Virginia. Youngkin has attracted attention because he represents a somewhat different model of Republican politics. Virginia has leaned toward the Democratic Party in recent presidential elections, yet Youngkin managed to win the governorship by crafting a message that appealed to suburban voters and moderates without completely alienating the conservative base. His background in business and private equity also gives him a profile that feels less traditionally political. For some strategists, Youngkin represents a potential bridge between the populist energy, unleashed by Trump, and the more conventional electoral strategies that dominated Republican campaigns before 2016. However, Youngkin also faces a different challenge. While he may appeal to moderates and independents, he has not yet built the same level of enthusiasm among the grassroots MAGA base that drives turnout in Republican primaries. There is also the question of whether the Trump family itself might continue to play a direct political role in the future of the movement. Some conservative activists have openly speculated about the possibility that Donald Trump Jr. could eventually enter the presidential arena. As the eldest son of the president, he has built a significant following among conservative media audiences and frequently appears at political rallies. His speeches often resonate strongly with the grassroots base that forms the core of the MAGA movement. Yet there is an obvious obstacle as well. Unlike many other potential candidates, Trump Jr. has never held public office. Running for president without prior governing experience is not impossible in American politics. But it does create a very different set of challenges when trying to convince voters and donors that a campaign is viable. Another name that sometimes appears in these conversations is Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina and former United States ambassador to the United Nations. Haley occupies a somewhat unusual position within the Republican coalition. She has experience in both state government and international diplomacy, and she has often presented herself as a candidate capable of appealing to a broad coalition of voters. As a female candidate with foreign policy credentials, she could potentially offer the party a different kind of national profile. At the same time, her relationship with the MAGA movement has been complicated. Some conservative voters view her as too closely aligned with the traditional Republican establishment, while others see her as a pragmatic leader capable of expanding the party's reach beyond its current base. All of this uncertainty highlights an important truth about American presidential politics. The real shape of a presidential race often does not become clear until 2 or 3 years before the election itself. New governors rise to prominence. Fresh Senate voices gain national attention. Occasionally, even a business leader or media personality enters the political arena and rapidly builds a following. Because of that constant churn, it is entirely possible that the Republican Party's eventual nominee in 2028 could emerge from a direction that very few analysts are seriously considering today. Despite all of these possibilities, one factor still looms larger than any other in shaping the future of the Republican Party, and that factor is Trump himself. As long as Trump remains the central figure within the conservative movement, his opinion will carry enormous weight in determining who ultimately leads the party. If he were to clearly and publicly endorse a specific successor, that endorsement would instantly transform the internal dynamics of the Republican primary. Donors would shift their support. Conservative media outlets would rally around the chosen candidate, and many grassroots voters would interpret the endorsement as a signal about who should carry the movement forward. That reality explains why so much attention currently focuses on figures like Vance and Rubio. Both are widely seen as politicians who maintain relatively close connections to Trump's political circle. Both have positioned themselves in ways that align with many of the priorities associated with the MAGA movement, and both have been discussed by commentators as potential heirs to the political coalition that Trump built over the past decade. At the end of the day, the debate about 2028 may actually be a debate about something even larger than a single election. It is really a debate about the future direction of the Republican Party itself. Will the party choose a leader who emphasizes ideological continuity with the MAGA movement? Will it select a candidate whose primary strength lies in broad national electability? Or will a new generation of conservative politicians emerge who reshape the movement in unexpected ways? For now, the answer to those questions remains uncertain, but one thing is already clear. The conversation about the next chapter of American conservatism has begun, and the decisions made over the next few years will shape not only the Republican Party, but potentially the entire trajectory of American politics in the decade ahead. Thanks for watching.